Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is the 5th, so the day before Christmas Eve. Um, I know a lot of you have been waiting for this video from me and my view on Venezuela. I didn't rush in because I didn't know what was going on totally. We still don't fully know, though we've got a pretty good idea what happens or what happened. So now I'm ready to comment. Um, I don't believe in just running in blindly because you usually wind up looking like a fool. I did have 7 interviews on Saturday from the Russian side. Yeah, it was an insane day. Got up a little late because still on holiday till the 12th. Not that I have holidays, since I work in a whole different field than when I used to work in the corporate field. Actually, you had the holidays. Uh, you know, I've got shows at 1 in the morning sometimes, especially for the Arabs. Shows at all times of the day. So I really um, I have a designated work day. It's any hour, any time, and yeah, that's just part of life. This kind of life. Military political analyst, Americanist, um, and I listen to a lot of our other experts on America. There was one from there was some Academy of American and Canadian Studies. And these experts, Jesus, I mean, they make some of the stupidest mistakes. Obviously, a lot of them, they don't even understand the difference between state and federal judicial systems in the U.S. When it comes to the theme of Maduro. And you listen to these guys, like they're starting to understand why our government here in Russia is making the missteps it has before dealing with the Americans, because these are the experts that are telling the president and the people around him or advice. I mean, they understand the U.S. better than the U.S. understands Russia. Absolutely. Russia got rid of its, or I'm sorry, the U.S. got rid of its Sovietologists and never created Russiatologists. They just kind of shot from the hip and still continue to do that, but they do that with the whole world. But Russia still these experts. When you got people, um, it's interesting because there's a lot of experts here, myself, other people I know who came from the U.S., either Russians or Americans who came from the U.S. that spent a long time in the U.S. The problem is we're all saying the things that they don't want to hear. That the U.S. is not going to stop. There is no making peace with the U.S. Not with the elites, and Trump is part of those elites that are sitting in power. They're hearing the uncomfortable truth, and they don't want to hear it oftentimes. So I've gotten invited a lot less to a lot of shows because of my position. And then I start talking to others, similar field. John Veroli, a few others, a couple of strictly Russian ones. And it's the same thing. They don't want to hear the truth. They invite these pseudo experts that just tell them fairy tales, including some Russians who live in America, not lived in America, but live actively in America, to tell them all these. Basically, I think these people are working for the CIA. They're telling them total BS what everybody wants to hear, not the reality of it. Not the reality of it, for example, that Trump just tried to assassinate, murder Putin. From the Russian side, they're not saying where Putin was located. Um, Peskov wouldn't say where Putin was located, but Western media is saying he was located at his residency in the Novgorod province, awaiting further negotiations by phone with Trump. This is Trump's MOD, SOI. You set people up and then you try to murder them. This is how America is run these days. I mean, America's been run pretty shitty to begin with for the last 120 years, 140 years, ever since Lincoln won the Civil War. So let's say 160 years. But this Trump takes the cake. He's crossed all sanity lines. So let's begin. We'll begin with the more in-depth. So, MAGA, welcome back to neocon on steroids. You thought you had it bad with Biden? You got Trump neocon on steroids. How's that swamp feeling? Because I don't think he not only did not drain that swamp, he flooded it even deeper. Welcome to your next Vietnam. Because first of all, okay, let's see what has been done so far. What has been done so far? There's been a raid, and Maduro was taken. We all know that. Interestingly enough, uh, those helicopters should have been wiped out. Especially the way they were flying. People are videotaping them flying in. You know how big a Chinook is? You don't fly a Chinook for a specialty SF mission. Sorry, Special Forces do not fly Chinooks. Chinooks are giant. They are loud. They are slow. They are a huge friggin' target for anything that can come up there and reach them. And as low as they were flying, pretty much everything could come up there and reach them. Starting with 7.62 or 5.54, 5.45 millimeter, and working your way up to anything that's rocket propelled, missiles, grenades, and so on and so on. Those Chinooks, if there was any kind of actual resistance, should have been burning. So, next step, who bought off whom? You see, this is the problem with Latin America, right off the bat. It's not just Latin America, it's Latins in general, going back to the Romans. See, in Russia, and Slavs, particularly in Russia, it was almost unheard of for any general, warlord, or what have you to set himself up as king, prince, or what have you. You had royal lines. You had multiple royal lines like the Ruriks, where you had four families fighting it out. True, but none of their nobility ever tried to take power without the consent of their ruling prince. They never try to overthrow him and put themselves in a seat. That just doesn't happen. That doesn't happen in Slavic culture in general, and in Russian culture in particular. We don't get run by juntas. Oh, you're going to start talking about, well, during the Civil War, Kolchak was an admiral. Well, Kolchak was no longer an admiral. He had resigned his commission and was a politician when he was running. Sure, he kept the title of admiral, but he was strictly running it as a president, or dictator, really, but president, as as a civilian politician, not as a military man. Just to keep that clear too. And Denikin and the rest of the generals in the South, they had a civilian government over them. Sure, they didn't agree with the civilian government. They often had problems with each other, particularly in running the Civil War from the white side in the South. But they had a civilian government over there. There's just some council of generals, some hierarchy of generals. And same thing on the Reds. They had a civilian government. So that's just part of Russian culture. So when 2 years ago on Russian television, everybody started talking about, oh, maybe the Ukrainian army will coup the government, and I'm I'm your little dark rain cloud. I'm the ants in your sandwich. I'm the one that pissed in your cereal. I stood up and I'm telling them there will not be any kind of military coup in Ukraine because, like it or not, those are Russians. They're demented. Their mental facilities have been degraded into the whole. True enough, but they're still ethnically and in the depth and the core of it culturally Russian. There will not be a military coup, not to be taken over by any generals. That's for sure. Now, Zaluzhny is no longer a general. He's resigned his commission. He's now turned himself into a politician. There is a fine, but major difference between one and the other. So again, that just isn't part of our culture. The Anglos, if you really look at it, once they settled down off their little warlord each other phase back around the 1200s and earlier, actually, more like the 1000s, with various Danish warlords coming in. The Danes, yeah, they chopped each other up pretty quickly and grabbed power from each other. That's part of their culture, but it really wasn't part of the Anglo-Saxon culture. If you look at it realistically, they didn't have too many generals taking over various Germanic kingdoms, and definitely not once Germany unified. You didn't have the same thing with the English. They had royal families, and when those royal families died out or deposed, it was deposed by other nobility families that became the royal families. You didn't have warlords and you didn't have generals taking power. You just didn't. The Latins, on the other hand, that's just part of their culture, starting with Rome. If anybody remembers their history, go through and see how many generals Roman generals took over power and became emperors. There was even the reign of the 30 generals, I think, something like that. With basically just one after the other after the other. Half of them didn't sit the throne for even half a year for getting chopped up, poisoned, whatever, overthrown by the next general. And the Byzantines, or rather the Eastern Romans, they continued that tradition. There were a lot of generals that became emperors. So that was a progression track, career progression track. In Russian culture, particularly, no general went higher than being a general. Nobody ever thought of trying to grab power. Just that just didn't happen. Not for themselves as to put themselves on the throne. Again, that just did not happen. Now, with the Latins, and that means the Romans, then the Italians now, the Spanish, to a much smaller degree the Franks, because they're more Germanic than Latin, the Portuguese, and all their possessions, generals cooing, grabbing power, betraying their government, being bought out. Meh, that's a pretty general thing. Same with the Arabs while we're at it. That's a cultural identity issue. It's one of the reasons the Arab countries, by the way, lose wars to Israel and to other states, is because all the Arab leaders are afraid of their generals. And he rarely allowed them to have more than one or two, three generals in a room together, because they're basically looking at it as, here comes the next conspiracy. Now, who's going to be the next one on the throne? And that just happens to be part of Arabic culture. There's even a good special forces document that came out, probably about 25, 30 years ago, why Arabs lose wars. And that was one of the big points of it, was that the Arab leaders are more afraid of their own generals than they are afraid of their enemies, like Israel. So they rarely are able to coordinate large-scale military actions because the generals aren't used to working with each other. But the problem is, if you let them work with each other, good chances is they'll coup you. Somebody else will be on the throne sooner than later. So that's a little cultural issue right there, if you ask me. And Latin America suffers extremely from that point. So apparently, what happened was Maduro was betrayed because these Chinooks, Blackhawks, they flew in low, they flew in loud, they didn't receive any fire, not even from his guards, and he and his wife were handed over. They were betrayed. Rodriguez now sitting in power as the vice president, the minister of defense, and supposedly they all got killed. Maybe some people did get killed. I'm sure some of the loyalists were killed. But the minister of defense is alive and well. He's videotaped. And then what you see is you see some crowds forming that are anti-Maduro and much larger crowds forming that are pro-Maduro. So what does all this mean? Let's take a step back. We will begin with Trump now rules Venezuela. Well, okay. We own Venezuela, we own the oil, we own blah, 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 blah. Well, that's kind of like you walk into a shop, you kidnap the manager of that shop, drag him out of that shop, take him to your house, jail him, and then say, I own that shop. Well, first of all, you don't rule that. I rule that shop and I own that shop. First of all, you don't rule that shop. You don't manage that shop because the assistant manager is now running that shop. So you still have the same management team in charge. So you don't rule that shop. You don't manage that shop. You can buy out the assistant manager. That's maybe what's going on right now with Rodriguez, no matter what she's saying about, we will struggle to the end. So obviously, Maduro was betrayed. That's obvious enough. He was removed by his own, at least a clique of his own people. And Rodriguez probably had something to do with this. That she was the next in power. She has now been sworn in as the president. Now, she does have an interesting past in that her father was tortured to death by the American-backed regime that previously ruled Venezuela. So she does have a chip on her shoulder against the Americans. How much of a chip and how much does she value not having to be afraid of her life or having to fight a revolution. That's hard to say. That's very hard to say. Having said that, even if she betrays everybody, here's a little problem for the Americans. Let's say 5% of the population is willing to take up guns, which have been distributed quite widely by Maduro, and support the government and defend against the American wannabe takeover. So what does that mean? 5% of the population out of 30 million, for those that don't understand math, particularly the average American who backs Trump, goes, oh yeah, we're powerful, Team America, woohoo! If you don't know what Team America is, go look it up. The puppet movie satire of U.S. foreign policy. It's more actively needed to be viewed now than it ever was even when it came out. You're looking at 1.5 million people in an extremely rugged, difficult terrain country. So let's keep going. So what is Maduro, first of all, being charged with before we go into everything else? Okay. Well, I'll go into everything else, then Maduro's charges, which are more ludicrous clown world. I mean, the charges are clown world. Okay, one second. So Trump announces, we now rule Venezuela. Well, again, you don't rule jack shit. You kidnapped the manager of the shop. You don't own the shop. Welcome to reality. You want to own that shop, you need to put your thugs in. Or at least try to change the management. The problem is changing the management. The majority of the population isn't going to accept that management. In this case, the rest of the employees of that shop. So you don't own that shop. You don't have the rights to that shop. You don't have the rights to what the shop sells. In this case, the oil. Oh, but it's not just the oil. Well, he says, oh, it's our oil. No, it's not your oil. It never was your oil. You have contracts. And those contracts can be canceled by a sovereign government, which, by the way, Venezuela is one of the few governments that didn't have a Rothschild bank. So far, it doesn't, which might be why Natty Boy Rothschild was one of the first to celebrate and congratulate neocon Trump on what he did. Oh, because they get richer. Have you noticed the pattern here? For the MAGA that hasn't noticed the pattern here, you're used. You're used as sheep. Trump is just friggin' riding you, shearing you, and raping you. There's your whole, we're not going to have any more wars. Because you know what Trump just said? We're going to rule Venezuela until we decide that the right government comes around. And he's not afraid to put boots on the ground, damn it. Hey, you're not going to scare me with that. That's true. Go listen to what Trump just said to you. Well, here's the little reality for the U.S. military, which is in shit shape to begin with. It ain't fit for a ground war in Afghanistan. It wasn't fit for a ground war in Iraq. Now it isn't. We're not talking about when that Iraq happened. Even Iraq, our real military would have taken every Ukraine in a week because we're a real military. Yeah, well, when the U.S. military was at a hell of a lot better position and shape than it is today. Oh, back 20-something years ago, 22 years ago, the U.S. military took 22 days to get to Baghdad. 22 friggin' days to get to Baghdad. Ain't that far of a drive across pretty much open territory with some swamp between the Tigris and Euphrates. But even those swamps were mostly destroyed by Saddam when he was fighting the swamp Arabs. Yes, that's an actual term. The swamp Arabs were a real thing. That's crazy. Yeah. Well, hey, they're not the Cajuns. Their food wasn't as spicy and they didn't eat pork and gator, but they were the swamp Arabs. So anyways, when the U.S. military at its full height and might with full air dominance came into Iraq, it took 22 days to take Baghdad. 22 friggin' days to take Baghdad. That's including the fact that the Kurds were fighting on the side of the U.S. up north. 22 days, baby. So tell us again how the U.S. Army is just going to march on into what? The Bolivar Republic? That's all jungle, savanna, and mountains and swamps? Yeah, okay. I'm stocking up on popcorn. I'm buying out popcorn left and right because this is exactly how the U.S. empire gets taken down. drained of resources and taken down. U.S. military is in shit shape. 20% of the U.S. military are women, including now in combat arms. They're not combat effective. Let's be realistic about this, particularly in the infantry or in heavy tube artillery, just even in the tanks. The anti-personnel rounds, shells for the tanks are 35 kilos, or I'm sorry, 35 pounds. So about 18 kilos. But still, that's not light for a small woman. You put in the infantry, they're carrying their body weight's worth of equipment on them. I've watched these training videos. It's pathetic. I mean, first of all, they're future of invalids because their bones aren't as dense as male bones. So their hip bones will wear out, back bones will wear out, leg bones will wear out. They're all looking at, if they're moving at full speed, you're looking at future invalids. Women get hurt faster, easier. They can't carry as much weight. Somebody else has to carry their weight because that weight has to be carried. So somebody has to carry 1.5 times, maybe double their own weight that they normally would have to carry because Lady Jane there, she just went down. And they're moving slow as hell. You're watching these women move, especially since weight restrictions aren't exactly that strongly mandated, particularly for women, because their body fat's allowed to be at 2.5, 3 times what males is, and yeah, a lot of that is on the hippage. And you're watching them getting up, trying to get across these targets. Like, Jesus Christ, dead, dead, dead. It's a sniper's wonderland. She's moving at the speed of 0, or her first gear. She ain't moving her arse. Maybe she'll move a little faster when a bullet's flying over her head. But probably the next one will move a little faster when the first one's bullet doesn't fly over her head but goes through her head. I mean, that's the reality of combat. Welcome to reality, ladies and gentlemen. Your PC bullshit falls away real quick when the enemy's taking you down left and right and doesn't give a damn about your little rainbow flags, doesn't give a damn about your little transgender whatever, and doesn't give a damn about your female girl power. That's the reality of combat. That drone won't give a damn. That sniper won't give a damn. That assault rifle won't give a damn. The grenade flying into your face from an underbarrel grenade launcher, you ain't going to be tossing that one back. So let's just put those little movie issues out of your heads. And even in close combat, if I'm tossing a grenade, more than likely I'm letting it cook off in my hand for about 2 seconds before I toss it in there. And you're going to have about 1 to 3 seconds before it blows up in your face. You ain't tossing it back. Not if it's done correctly. Welcome to freaking reality. That's the reality of combat. And if you can't handle that reality, you don't need to be there, especially if you're a quote volunteer army. But it won't be a quote volunteer army for very long, which is what I'm getting at. Because the U.S. Army's in shit shape. It barely managed in open and mountainous but mostly non-forested terrain in Afghanistan and Iraq, where the visibility for any aviation assets, including those big drones, those Reaper drones, was pretty much so, at least 80%. Now try triple canopy jungle, baby. You don't see shit for 2 meters ahead of you, let alone from a mile away, a click away or half a click away. You don't know what's hiding behind the next tree in the jungle. Well, you're going to be patrolling or try to burn off or do something with it, because that equipment, but Trump is going to replace, because it is true that most of that equipment is worn out. Partially, it is the fault of Chavez and Maduro, because they took a lot of that funding that was meant to be for repairs and replacement of equipment, and they spent it on social programs. Part is because the U.S. has effectively stole or frozen $8 billion worth of their assets from Venezuela. Stupid on Venezuela, on Chavez, to keep his assets in the banks of his quote-unquote frenemy number one. But what's done is done. So there's that. That has to be replaced. But look at the other things. And like I've said before, if you haven't heard that, 80% of Venezuela's oil assets are not on the coast and are not in deep sea. They're interior. So there's logistics issues. There's issues of maintenance of these, maintenance and running of these isolated platforms out in the middle of nowhere land. And you've got to get that oil and gas, by the way. They have plenty of gas. You got to get that oil and gas to port to export. That means either pipes or trucks. Both of them go boom really well, especially with a drone, with a grenade attached to it or an RPG attached to it, is more like it. You ever seen a fuel truck burn? Oh, baby. Just so you understand how hard they burn, there was an incident in North Carolina where the driver fell asleep, rammed his truck into the pylon of a bridge, of a concrete bridge, and that thing burned so hot that the concrete started melting, and the iron, the steel, I'm sorry, the low alloy steel in rebar inside that concrete started to melt, and the concrete buckled, and the bridge collapsed. That's how hot it burns. Oh yeah, those that one grenade, even an anti-personnel grenade on a light drone has a good chance of setting that thing off blazing. And you believe you me, that's going to be burning. So Trump now owns Venezuela. Well, in his mind, anyways. At least he's the one true thing he said is Machado is out. Machado is a know nothing. I'm sure she's not too thrilled about to find that out. That she's bye bye. You were a good mascot. Now you're gone. Now the question then becomes, since she's one of the leading opposition, and she's just been dethroned, and all her future plans of being Miss Empress of Venezuela are gone down the drain, what is she going to do? And the people around her? Because Trumpy boy and the typical American stupidity that shrouds all of Washington's great minds has just turned that portion of the quote opposition into enemies as well. Because I doubt if she's just going to go into that good night. She's going to fight the dying of the light, her light, anyways, because she wants to be in power, and she was being promised to be in power, and all of a sudden she's been deposed, and Rubio, whose family were, by the way, viceroys in their own time, Spanish viceroys, he comes from those lines, gets to be viceroy of Venezuela. Think about that, the American empire. So Rubio gets to be viceroy of Venezuela, whatever that means for him, because I don't think he can manage his own ass in his own pants, let alone something realistic like an entire country. He's not exactly the smartest man, right? He's clever, he's cunning, and he's quite willing to backstab whatever is out there. But you're not dealing with the brightest apple, or the reddest apple and the brightest apple in that bunch of apples. You're dealing with, lackluster American politicians of the modern era. So Viceroy Rubio now gets to run Venezuela with no experience of running anything. But which, by the way, is still being run by the previous government. So you either have to somehow, but Trump is going to nation build. Welcome back to neocon land. Mega, feel the pain. You're about to feel the pain. Trump is going to neocon nation build and give back Venezuela to the people when he feels that it's ready, whatever the hell that means. Luckily, the U.S. Congress are a bunch of neutered twats, as they have been for years. I mean, America, look at it realistically. America is no republic at all. The duties, I'm not going to say rights, the duties of the U.S. Congress are ignored at all times. Basically, we're down to rule by decree from the local emperor, Trump, and whoever comes after him. It's the Congress and the people. The people haven't had a say in Congress in a long time, but Congress doesn't have any say at all now. And why have any say? They're on board with whatever Trump says nowadays. So, because the U.S. Congress, as a bunch of rats that they are, for the most part, with a few exceptions, there's some good people there, but they're a vast, vast minority. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene that are now leaving. And they're a vast minority because they get pushed out. Cynthia McKinney, who, by the way, I interviewed, was from the House of Representatives for Georgia. She was pushed out for speaking truth to power. They all get pushed out, or they get destroyed, or get murdered. That's how the U.S. government runs and has run for quite a while. Now it's just a straight up imperial republic, if you want to call it a republic. Rome pretended to be a republic and had a senate for 200 years after it was no longer a republic. Sure, they had a bunch of rich guys got together, got to steal part of the budget to make themselves rich, but and then rubber stamped whatever was given to them. Sound familiar? This is why republics inherently do not last. This is not the first wave when most of the governments were republics in the world. It's about the third historical wave like that in the last 4,000 years. And they all failed. They all failed relatively quickly. Just because of this, you're watching it fail. You're watching the reason it fails. This is why, again, I am a constitutional monarchist. And when people go, oh, monarchy, yeah, well, it's a hell of a lot better than having a bunch of oligarchs in power and some would-be tyrant rising up to be, quote, emperor of reality with his ego, America. So today's, what you gawk at today becomes tomorrow's wisdom, common wisdom. So anyways, U.S. Army is in a shit show. And Viceroy Rubio has to rely on maybe the security forces they bought out? Maybe. Now, if you think there's not going to be an opposition, and there's not going to be opposition to Americans, just look what's on the ground right now. Sure, they're showing you episodes of small crowds tearing down some Maduro poster or some other thing like that. Look at the big crowds marching in the streets that are supporting Maduro. There's been 100 civilians that were killed in this little shit show operation of Trump's. The greatest operation that ever existed in all of history, because it's the greatest thing, because I am the greatest person that ever lived in the world history, and I am better than Jesus. Trump. Yeah. Well, yeah. Do you think the relatives of those people are going to be so thrilled with American presence? The people that were just killed? And now you're starting to figure out how this is going to run. So let me run this down for you a little bit. If you don't know how the U.S. military operates in any of these countries, shoot first, ask later. If a sniper opens fire from a building, the standard protocol has been, for quite a long time, return fire, break contact, step back, call in the artillery. You take out that grid square if you can, or at least that building, and screw whoever's living in that building. It's women, children, whomever else. So this is how you make lots and lots of new partisans. And this worked against the Germans. It worked against most empires, arrogant empires like the U.S., like the Nazis were, and so on. In my church when I was living in Houston, there was an old Greek there who was a Greek partisan, and he was telling me, he was a sniper. He said, and I'm sitting on one mountain overlooking a village on the next mountain. They're pretty close. Okay, they're not big mountains. He was at, but there's Germans walking in the square, and I'm popping the Germans' heads off. And I know that for every German I kill, they're going to shoot 30, 40 people in revenge. But I also know that all of their relatives are now going to become partisans. They're going to have revenge on the Germans, and that's how you swell your ranks. It's worked always, and it will continue to work. So sooner than later, a few Americans are going to get popped. Trump's already flat out said, oh, you're not going to scare me with boots on the ground. We're going to have boots on the ground. Well, the U.S. Army, like I said, is in a shit show. They're going to get boots on the ground. Just so you understand, for those that don't know their history, at its height, the U.S. military had 550,000 people, more than 500,000 people in Vietnam. If you combine the U.S. Army right now with the Marine Corps, you're getting about those numbers combined. And that's not considering the U.S. military is spread thin everywhere. Tired. And you got guys that had 6 to 8 deployments, 6 to 8 years of service in Afghanistan and Iraq. The U.S. military is tired. Equipment is worn. It's not fit for conventional combat, but it is definitely not fit for jungle warfare. Outside of special forces, the U.S. military really doesn't do jungle warfare. You have to relearn a lot of lessons from Vietnam. So what you're going to have now is you're going to have the draft, because the reserves are pretty much so tired out the same way. The Reserve, National Guard, they've been getting called up nonstop for the last 25 years. They're done. A lot of people quit because I'll tell you why they quit. The moment those reservists and National Guard come back, because you have to keep their job for them, if they don't quit the National Guard or reserves, those employers will find any damn reason to fire them. Because when those people get called up, inevitably get called up again for another year, year and a half, what are you going to do? Especially if you have a position where you're tied to clients and client relationships. You got to keep those relationships going. The guy is gone for a year. You have to keep somebody in that position so you get a new person. And then when the guy comes back, you have to remove that person. Businesses can't run like that. So the citizen soldier concept was only for big invasions or catastrophes inside the states, not for continual rolling call-ups. It destroys the whole concept of citizen soldiers. So the guard is pretty much a worn out. And this war is going to just kill the guard. People will quit left and right. You're going to go to the draft because that's the only way you're going to be able to maintain any kind of coherent force there. It's the only way you're going to maintain any kind of coherent force there. So you're talking long-term occupation. U.S. has directly threatened to do the same thing to Colombia. It's threatening Brazil, threatening Cuba, threatening everybody that doesn't agree and doesn't kowtow on their knees to the U.S. Government. Now, having said that, on top of that, the U.S. government is talking about rebuilding programs. Well, they need it's not rebuilding programs for the average Venezuelan that they always promise that. Nobody in the last 100 years has prospered from a U.S. invasion on their land. Not a single country. Name me one country that's prospered from a U.S. invasion. Okay, maybe you could say West Germany was rebuilt. Okay, that would count, I guess, through a Marshall Plan. But Germany's still an occupied state, being pushed into World War III and its own extinction by the people that occupy it. Just most Germans are now West Germans anyways, are too stupid to realize that. They will enjoy being wiped out by the Russian army, I guess, because that's their mentality. Unfortunately, to say East Germans are a whole different animal. Yes, it's that extra Sorb Slavic blood in there. Anyways, sorry. But East Germans are very mentally different from West Germans. You got to remember, Germany as a state has been a unified one state since 1878 for less than 100 years, like 98 years. So and it's hard to understand if it's actually unified. It has a border, but culturally it's far from being unified, and they're all quote Germans. They're very different in different areas. So, anyways, so all these colonial invasions by the U.S., nowhere has life gotten better. You could say even then from the American-Spanish War, Cuba didn't get better. The reason Castro came to power in Cuba because Batista was a psychopath, and 90% of Cubans lived in abject poverty. While America's rich, including all of the mafia, went down there to party in Cuba all the time. The real reasons for revolution. On the corporate side, I was always taught incorrectly that if your plant unionizes, that's a failure of management to take care of its employees. If your country goes Marxist, that's a failure of the country's leadership to take care of its citizens. That's a damn good bellwether right there. That you're screwing the pooch. Yeah, in the U.S. they've screwed so many pooches, it's not even funny. So what's going to happen is the U.S. is going to go in. Some Americans are going to get popped. America's going to do this, what America does always, heavy-handed start collateral damaging, if you want to call that, or we could just say murdering the civilians left and right, which is going to breed insurgency like crazy. And they're going to find themselves in the middle of a new Vietnam. Except guess what, buddies? You're going to get proxied from every single direction because you've threatened like Lindsey Graham, lighting the loafers there is dancing all around. Oh yeah, yeah, Iran, China, India, everybody else is gonna be next. Oh, you gotta be paying attention. Trump's coming to get you, yeah, and I'm gonna get your little boys. Woo, woo, woo. We're coming to get you. We're gonna get you. We're gonna get you. We're gonna get you. Hey, dumbass, there's a warrant for your arrest with a bounty on your head in Russia. Guess what your little buddy there, the red giant, just did? The Jolly Red Giant just removed any compunction from any nation not to go after whomever else in the next nation. So next time you're traveling over to Ukraine to spend another $1 million in U.S. taxpayers for 3 days of vacation in the Radisson Hotel in Kiev, just understand there's a big bounty on your head. And if you don't think there's people in Kiev that are wanting to collect it, you just may wind up in Russian shackles before you know it. So keep jumping up and down there, laugh boy, and see where this leads you. No, nobody's going to bring you, nobody's going to let you diddle anybody in jail, in a Russian jail anyways. So there's that. These guys are idiots. There's a reason you don't do these things that you do. Oh, we sent the DEA to capture Maduro. Maduro didn't commit any crimes in the U.S. and U.S. jurisdiction, unless you accept that U.S. jurisdiction is everywhere in the whole world, which in the mind of the average American politician is quite that. So there's that little moment of unreality. So what do we got on our hands? We got an upcoming Vietnam that's going to get proxied by everybody. And I mean Russia, China, India, Brazil, Colombia, Cuba. Everybody with half a brain is going to be proxying the crap out of that one. Maybe the Panamese will actually grow a pair of balls to defend their national interests. I doubt it. The government anyways, but the people may. There's still plenty of Panamanians who are more than pissed off at America for murdering their relatives in that little adventure the U.S. had in Panama. It killed a lot of civilians. They didn't really talk about it, but they killed a lot of civilians. And those cinder block buildings were getting whacked by M60 machine guns, 7.62 going right through it. Any of the Panamanian defense forces or gunmen that opened up fire in the urban areas, U.S. military just took down whole buildings. That's how it runs. It's ineffective, but that's how it runs. It's because it's very effective in creating further enemies. The U.S. just had brain power to get not to occupy Panama. Not here, not this time. There's that. And basically, the U.S. has put everybody on warning that it will murder off any foreign leaders around. Well, the reason you don't murder foreign leaders is because those foreign leaders can start murdering you off. But again, the baboons in the administration and Congress are too stupid to realize that little fact. They think they have all the power. They don't. Obviously enough, they don't. And far from it. But that's what they believe. So what do? Well, we roll forward. I mean, look at it this way. Again, for the 12D, 50D, 1 billion D chess players out there in MAGA that still support Trump to the end because he's a genius. Well, just what he's doing right now shows you he's a dumbass, surrounded by more dumbasses. These are the stupidest people around. Their plan started and ended at capturing Maduro. And now they're trying to figure out what to do. And all this time, these morons didn't go to end the next day. What do we do the next day? They never went that far. That's what I'm going to name this episode. That's why I named this episode The Next Day. Because these fools don't figure things out the next day. We'll wing it. Well, the U.S. has winged it a lot. It winged it in Afghanistan. It winged it in Iraq. It's winged it in Ukraine. It winged it in Syria. It winged it in Somalia. It winged it in Yugoslavia. It's still winging it everywhere. And how successful has it been in any of those areas? Pretty shitty. The only thing that saved the U.S. is there hasn't been that many casualties. Plenty of people that were heavily injured, not that many dead coming back. And that's all that counts. The invalids that are coming back into Walter Reed hospitals, On these other hospitals, they don't count. Nobody notices them. The military, the veterans committing suicide at rates of 20 plus a day, nobody notices them. They don't matter in the American eye, in the American public, and the American public is cold-blooded as hell for that. They will thank you for service while you're serving. Sometimes they will thank you for the service afterwards. Well, I don't know how many of them actually mean it. It's kind of like saying, "Hey, how you doing?" They don't want to know how you're doing. They're just saying, "Hey, how you doing?" Hey, thanks for the service. What does that mean? Who the hell knows what that means? Thanks for protecting my freedoms of Afghanistan, where they somehow accidentally got lost. And other stupid crap like that low information voter crap that people repeat like parrots. And they get repeated in the same thing in most of Western Europe too while we're at it. So you look at this and you go, yeah, okay. How many are volunteering for service? Not that many. So what are we looking at? We're looking at a draft. So little Johnny is going to get to go to be the first one on his block to go to a foreign country, meet foreign people, and kill them or get killed by them. And when the body bags start coming back, and they will, we'll see how all those people still feel about it. Particularly since most of the combat troops, as usual for the U.S. military, are going to be coming from white boys in the South and the Midwest. And what has the South gotten for supplying the majority of the manpower for Washington's little games all over the world? Nothing. Poverty rates higher than many other parts of the U.S. What? Invasions by woke liberals from the North to destroy Southern heritage. What has the South gotten for dying in droves for Washington's little adventures? Nothing. But it's who's going to be doing most of the dying is the Southeast, the old Confederacy, and the Midwest. I guess that's how you keep the Confederacy from ever rising again. You kill off a lot of their young men, or you put them in wheelchairs, or on crutches, or with whatever disabilities. They ain't going to be rising up if they can't do it. Of course, you got to trick them into fighting Washington's wars for what? No gain for themselves, and definitely no gain for their states or their homeland. But that's how it's run, and it's been run very effectively that way for the last 100 years. I guess it'll continue being run that way. Oh well, people don't learn. They deserve to step on that same rake over and over again. Occasionally, there's a knife at the end of that rake just sticking their forehead. Maybe that gets their point. So Venezuela is going to be that knife. And every other country in the world has an incentive to proxy the U.S. into defeat in Venezuela. And if Trump expands this out to Cuba and to Colombia, as he's threatening to, and tries to overthrow Brazil, oh, this is only going to get better. This is. I don't think there's enough popcorn in Moscow for me to buy up all the popcorn I'll need for this one. I mean, this you talk about grandiose ideas. You haven't set boots on the ground to quote own. You virtually own and run Venezuela at this point, but you're already making plans for the rest of Latin America and Mexico too. While we're at it, they're going to go after Mexico. I mean, Mexico is a drug cartel center, but the U.S. ain't got enough of manpower to take on Mexico right now. Let's be realistic about this. Those Mexican gangs, there's 150,000 people working for them. Half of those are well armed, well trained. These aren't, those Mexican gangs have gone to a different level. These aren't the gangs of the 80s and 90s. They literally have boot camps for their fighters. These guys are trained well enough, particularly in guerrilla warfare and fighting in city limits, urban warfare. They have heavy weapons. They have American javelins waiting for American Abrams. They have American Stingers waiting for American Apaches and Blackhawks. Thank you, Ukraine. Yeah, baby. How many American politicians and generals got kickbacks from those arms sales? Yeah, didn't see that blowback coming, did you? Those arms sales to the black market are going to show up on your own border. Stupid is as stupid does. But hey, who's counting? How many of those generals, by the way, how many politicians in general or anybody else have been arrested for any of the graft and corruption in Ukraine? As many as for Epstein. That's right, baby. Nothing exists as far as we're concerned. That's how we drain the swamp. We let the swamp animals retire. and that the new ones start coming in. That's how it's. That's how the U.S. drains its swamp. Wait till they retire and pose them a happy retirement. So there's that. Now the clown world part. What has Maduro been charged? The number one charge. It's not drug running. I guess they could have charged him with sedition because he stood up to the U.S. government because, everything is owned by Trump and the U.S. government now. The whole world's owned. So if you don't like the U.S. government, you're seditious against the U.S. government. I'm not putting that past reality because what he's been charged with is firearms violations. Let that fucking sink in. Firearms violations. He owned a machine gun. He owned assault rifles, fully automatic without federal permits. The president of an independent nation is being charged with American firearms violations. There's your clown world. You can't make this crap up. So I'm sure they'll probably charge him with sedition for standing up against Washington because, everything's owned by Washington. So anybody that doesn't like Washington is sedition against Washington. Washington is everything and everyone. It's all humanity encompassing. And the God Emperor of the Orange God Emperor will tell you what to do, what to think, and how to be because he owns everything. And when he says Epstein didn't exist, his files didn't exist, they didn't exist. Damn it, you better get in line. That's right. Welcome to Clown World. 24/7. Cheers. God bless.